就開會啦。
Let's call this meeting to order. Item 1, information papers issued since the last meeting. Since the last meeting, the Secretariat issued some papers. So please refer to the agenda. I think we just received a letter tabled by 2 district councillors. And then, next item. The next meeting will be scheduled for the 8th of June to discuss 2 items. First, Community Care Fund, and second, additional funding of $900 million for arts matching grant. So, if there is no objection, these will be the items for the next meeting. And then item 3, amendment of pleasure grounds regulation to step up control of noise nuisance in parks managed by the Leisure and Cultural Services Department. Please invite the administration to come in. Members have raised their hands. Let me read out their names. We have Vincent Chang, Kenneth Lau, Andrew Wan, Siu Ka Chun, Ip Kin Yun, Tony Chair, Ted Hui. In attendance of today's meeting, we have Mr. Casper Choi, Secretary for Home Affairs, Ms. Ida Lee, Deputy Director of Leisure and Cultural Services, and also Mrs. Doris Falk, LCSD. So over to you, Secretary. Thank you. Chairman, good afternoon. Today, I'd like to brief members on our proposal to further amend the pleasure grounds regulation. In order to step up regulation of noise nuisance in parks managed by the LCSD, the community is concerned about the regulation of noise nuisance in parks managed by the LCSD and the nuisance cost to different people, including venue users, nearby residents. And in April last year, we consulted the panel. In relation to Section 25 of the regulation, we propose some legislative amendments to expand the definition of person subject to annoyance from venue user or user thereof to any person, so that any persons, including nearby residents, can lodge complaints and enforcement action can be taken to step up control. There should also be step-up control of noise nuisance in parks. We attach importance to the panel's views, and having reviewed the regulation and considered the views, we are going to take a multi-pronged approach and propose the legislative amendments in 3 areas. First, enhance the effectiveness of law enforcement. Second, step up control of musical performances and singing activities. And 3, increase the deterrence. Now, under enhance the effectiveness of law enforcement, we're going to expand the definition of person subject to annoyance. We're also going to step up control of musical performances and singing activities. We're going to add a new provision in Section 25 prohibiting unauthorized persons from playing music, singing songs, or carrying out other music-related activities in parks and accepting any money or reward licee. The Director of Leisure and Cultural Services is also, or will also be empowered to put up a notice stipulating the provisions to be complied with in the playing of musical instruments and singing activities. We hope that by doing so, the government can be more proactive in tackling noise problems in parks, and that a faster and more flexible response can be made to cater for different situations. Third area is increase of the deterrence effect. At the moment, the penalty level is set at a fine of level 1. That is a maximum fine of $2,000 and imprisonment for 14 days. We propose to increase the level to level 3, $10,000, and maintain the imprisonment term of 14 days. I welcome questions from members. We discussed this item at the panel before. Members already gave a lot of views to the administration, and in light of these views, the administration has revised their proposal. I'll give each member 4 minutes, questions and answers included. We start with Mr. Vincent Chang. Thank you, Chairman. I have a question for the Secretary. We want to step up control over the noise nuisance in parks as well, because we have a number of major parks in Twin Moon Park, for example, and Hoi Sum Park in West Kowloon. The problem of nuisance is really serious. We have people using loudspeakers and amplifiers to carry out singing. It's a great nuisance to residents nearby. We all urge the government to plug the loophole in the regulation to deal with the problem. Now, I have a number of questions relating to the paper. We see increased deterrence, but the maximum fine will only be set at $10,000. Will there be any progressive tariff? Say for subsequent offences, will the fine level be increased? Second, in terms of law enforcement, there are obstacles, for example, a shortage of manpower and lack of your staff presence in parks. So how are you going to set up a dedicated team of staff to deal with the problem? Third question about timetable. We're in mid-May. When do you think you will be able to complete it? We don't want dilly-dallying, because it's already giving a great nuisance to residents. In fact, because of the epidemic, we see fewer such activities. But it's really our concern as the epidemic abates. We see more crowds in the streets, and we wonder if the problem will re-emerge. So you should take preventive measure by, say, giving advice and public education to make sure that they don't come back again. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Member, for the questions. About heavier penalties for subsequent offences, if we are to propose this amendment, it cannot be dealt with under the existing proposal. Now, let's take your question on timetable. If members agree to our proposal, as members previously also urged the government to introduce amendments as soon as possible. This meeting has been rescheduled a number of times because of the epidemic. So with members' support, we'd like to table the amendment into the Council as soon as possible. I understand that we are ironing out the detail on textual matters, and we hope that before this Council is prorogued, we will be able to complete with all the amendments. We're also mindful about the time frame. As for frontline staff, there are a few things we can do under the existing regulation. For example, if we need to invoke Section 32, our LCSD staff can evict offenders out of the venues. As for the maximum fine of $10,000, we've drawn reference to other pieces of legislation. Say for CAP 400, noise control ordinance, the maximum fine is also $10,000. So the new proposed fine level is 5 times the previous one. We believe we should be able to meet the request. Right, I understand that, Chairman. We welcome proposals to amend the law so that you can have more clout in your enforcement. But can you give an undertaking that once the epidemic situation stabilizes, you don't need to have a repeat of what you've been doing, so that in June, in July, noise become more serious, and you will only say by then that you're working on the legislative amendments. Meanwhile, we will introduce public education, publicity. Will step up and patrol as well. Next, Mr. Lau Yip Kang. Chairman, people take a stroll in parks, they exercise in parks. We have family gatherings, enjoying the time in parks without causing nuisance to others. And people's right to sing and dance in parks should be respected. But of course, if the noise is excessive, nearby residents will be affected, and there should be cooperation. Now, noise nuisance in parks is an old-standing problem. Just like Tuen Mun Park, the problem has existed for over a decade, troubling the community. At first, some people sang and played musical instruments, and then eventually, some performers used loudspeakers, amplifiers, generating excessive noise, and there have also been rather indecent scenes in the parks. And according to Section 25 of the regulation, the administration is going to amend this piece of regulation to expand the definition of persons subject to annoyance, and I welcome this amendment so that the government can be more proactive in its enforcement action, because other people may now act as prosecution witness. As for tipping or acceptance of pecuniary reward, prohibiting this can help with enforcement. However, we have performers singing or playing music in parks not generating nuisance. Say if somebody in order to show appreciation leaves a $10 note, will it be regarded as an offense? And will this be an oppression to street performers? Thank you for the question, and thank you, Chairman. It's really difficult to strike a balance in terms of our enforcement action in parks. We mustn't be too tight or too lax. We'd like to have an environment for everybody to enjoy. A member mentioned singing in a park. Of course, if it is not excessively loud, it is not a nuisance and it's all right. However, we need to strike a balance. In particular, in the past few years, we sometimes see tipping activities and nuisance costs to the neighborhood. And in fact, last year we already exchanged views with members here, and we agreed that this problem cannot be dealt with under the existing legislation. No matter the venue, especially parks, as long as everybody is in compliance, then everybody can enjoy themselves. However, we now have a problem, and in fact, at the last meeting, we consulted members' views, and we have a consensus. Members believe that we should step up our effort, including enforcement actions and also regulation of music performances and singing. And that is why, in our proposed legislative amendments with the 3 areas, we categorically mentioned prohibition of acceptance of pecuniary reward, including licee. That's because of what we see in the parks, and that these activities are spiraling out of control. Some residents, some park users cannot really enjoy themselves, and their right to enjoy the space and sing there are also affected. That is why we are introducing these details.
Of course, if people just carry out these activities for their own enjoyment, and if they don't create noise nuisance, of course, these can be allowed, and we don't need to invoke these regulations. It is in the past we saw that without these amendments, law enforcement or the enforcement actions have not been very easy. Mr. Wen Xiuqin. Thank you, Chairman. I agree to the proposed amendments. As we all know, in New Territories, West Tuen Mun Park, it's really it's a place of serious problem. So now I can see that there is amendment regarding the raising of the penalty level, and some member even suggested to have higher level of penalty. I have 3 points about the enforcement actions. First, I'd like to ask the term any other person. If there is complaint, anonymous complaint, so will the government accept it? Because sometimes residents may not want to disclose their names. Well, any other person, does it include people who lodge anonymous complaint. And second, you will have some objective noise measurement mechanism, right? For instance, there might be some kind of noise level measurement equipment. So I think there must be some objective mechanism instead of just for subjective decision. And third, for tipping, well, there might be some tipping that does not happen at the spot. For instance, outside of the venue, or they receive the pecuniary award outside of the venue or later on. Or might be some electronic money or electronic licensee might be given instead of the physical packets, red packets. So how are you going to avoid this kind of situation from happening, or how do you fill this loophole? And also, what about if there are activities, for instance, people carrying big equipments, big musical instruments, can you perhaps have some regulations to prevent people from entering the venue with such big musical instruments? Otherwise, if only a few $1,000s penalty, this may not achieve the deterrent effect. Secretary? Thank you, Chairman. For setting the noise nuisance level, we have taken into consideration or withdraw reference from other regulations as well. We have drawn reference from similar regulations in other places and countries as well. Well, if there are complaints lodged by nearby residents, then the LCST staff can also act as the prosecution witness. For our enforcement actions, it is important for us to have witness and to have evidence. We need to collect evidence. And because of the proposed amendment this time, we would allow more people to be able to serve as the prosecution witness. For instance, if there is a complaint lodged and if the LCSD staff go to the site and really find that the noise level is high, then this staff can also serve as the witness. So this would make the enforcement action more effective. As for electronic tipping, yes, we agree that this might be one of the forms of tipping, and also delayed tipping or delayed reward. Yes, we will go back and look into the matters in further detail. What about people carrying heavy equipment and heavy musical instruments? Will they be banned from entering the venue if they are repeated offenders? Yes, we have looked into the matter, and we find that at present, in Section 32, it enables the LCSD staff to evict people or repeated offenders from the venue. So the existing regulation already enabled the LCSD staff to do that. Yes, I hope that you will listen to the views of the councillors and then fill the loopholes. Thank you, Chairman. Well, as we all know, the Tuen Mun Park has been suffering from noise nuisance for a long time, and it started in 2003. There were people lodging complaint, and up to 2019, members all agreed that government should step up with its enforcement actions. Of course, we welcome this proposed amendment. There are a few technical points I'd like to raise. First, well, about pecuniary reward. Well, along this line, I'd like to ask if you have clearer definition on the term of self-enjoyment. If, for instance, someone is doing the singing or the dancing for self-enjoyment, well, without pecuniary reward, well, how do you define whether it's self-enjoyment or not? Well, of course, there are people in the Tuen Mun Park who said that they were doing that for self-enjoyment only. And so that's why Tuen Mun Park had to scrap the area for self-enjoyment. So how do you make a definition of whether that person is singing or dancing for self-enjoyment or for pecuniary award? And next, if the person, for instance, have been warned and then after repeated reminder they would still not lower their noise level, then they will be asked to leave the venue. But then how many times or how many chances will they be given? 3 times, 5 times of warning before they will be evicted? I'm sure that there will be some detailed definition of this. Perhaps you have not covered it yet. And in 2019, July 6th, there was a protest in Tuen Mun Park, and there were policemen who escorted people who danced in the park to leave the venue. And after the the amended regulations is in force, then I'd like to ask, who would have the ultimate power to decide whether the group of performers should be escorted to leave the park? Does it lie in the LCSD staff or in the police? When we're talking about noise level in parks, it's not just a problem in Tuen Mun Park. I remember when I was working in the Home Affairs Department, the Hoi Sam Park in Tu Kwa Wan also had the same problem. And in the Kowloon City District Council, councillors were discussing about this issue as well. So in the last term, actually Tuen Mun and also Kowloon City District Councils had come across this problem. So we find that if we do not propose a legislative amendment to the regulations, it will be difficult for government to exercise enforcement actions, or for the LCSD staff to exercise those actions. We're talking about the noise level. Would there be any objective threshold? When we look at some venue, if it is in outskirt area, so relatively quiet place, so the noise level or the threshold would be different from that of the city or the downtown. So we let the LCSD staff to decide whether the noise level is acceptable or not. And under the noise control regulation, there are stipulations about how law enforcement actions should be taken and what are the objectives level of measurement of noise level. I think the Secretary has not answered my question. What is definition of self-enjoyment? Second, how many times of warning before eviction? And third, who should have the power to decide whether the performers could be escorted to leave the venue? Well, Section 32 has empowered the LCSD staff to evict offenders to leave the venue. I'd like to know if LCSD colleagues have any supplement. If we invoke Section 32 to evict people or offenders out of the venue, that would be under pleasure grounds regulation, and the enforcement staff would be the LCSD staff. Of course, in the past, about noise control, we know that we need to have some joint action. So if the problem has caused public order problem, then of course the police also has the power to carry out enforcement. Well, how many times of reminders? Well, normally we will have some verbal reminder and ask them to stop the noise-making activities. If they continue, then we will collect evidence in the environment, and then we will carry out enforcement actions. This is our normal practice. Of course, after the legislation is amended, we will have clearer stipulation and give our LCSD staff clearer guidelines in carrying out enforcement actions. Well, that means how many times of reminder? You haven't answered me. Perhaps you can answer them in writing after the meeting. Mr. Yip Kin Yuen, Chairman, about this proposed legislative amendment, my views are more or less the same with other colleagues. Well, we all understand that problem, the noise problem in parks prevail, and that's why the relevant proposed legislative amendments are welcome. My question is as follows, because there are a number of proposed amendments in the legislature. Before it is tabled to the LegCo, and then after our discussion at this meeting, do you have plans of consulting the district councils? Can you perhaps tell us the situation? Thank you, Chairman. As Mr. Yip has pointed out, this noise problem has been occurring in many parks for many, many years. So in the past, we have been in contact with the district councils, and sometimes they contacted us proactively also. So we have been talking with them, and we have been receiving letters from the district councillors. So we all agree that we should push forward and amend the legislation as soon as possible so that the problem can be curbed. Well, after discussing this, if legislators would like to continue to discuss this issue with us, we would welcome that as well. Chairman, actually, my question is that about the present proposed amendment. Yes, of course, Secretary said in the past few years this problem prevailed, and we have been talking about it on different occasions. But I'd like to ask whether the district councils have been consulted. Well, if not, then after this meeting, do you have any plans to carry out a public consultation or consultation with DB? And do you have any plans of this consulting the district councils? In April last year, we had consulted the chairman of the 18 chairman and vice chairman of the 18 district councils. And also last year, we had a proposed amendment that was tabled to this council. And for Tuen Mun District Council, it has conducted several rounds of discussion on this matter. Well, Chairman, that means April last year you had done that. You have consulted. You mean last year, last April? Yes, we have tabled a paper to the LegCo in April last year, and members at that time thought that our proposed amendments were not strong enough, and that's why after a year we put in further effort, and actually we should have come earlier, but because of the epidemic situation, several months, we have delayed a couple of months. Last time when we tabled the proposed amendments, members thought that our proposal were not strong enough. They wanted us to raise the penalty level and want to have stronger deterrent effect. And that's why after our consultation with the district council last year, we come back this time because taken into consideration their views and also views from the legislative councillors. We have also consulted with the DOJ, and on the basis of all these views, we come up with further amendments, and that's why we propose these in front of members today. For Tuen Mun District Council, when did you consult them?
The Tuen Mun District Council discussed this item at several previous meetings. Recently, yes, within this term. So for Hoi Sam Park, it's Kowloon City District Council. Did the council discuss it? I don't have information at hand. I can supplement this information afterwards. Well, these are just the basic steps. I hope you will consult the relevant district councils. I believe they did. Maybe they can supplement the dates of the consultation after the meeting. Yes. Mr. Tony Chair. Thank you, Chairman. On the whole, I support the LCSD's proposed amendment to Section 25 of Pleasure Grounds Regulation so as to manage the parks more effectively and to make sure users abide by the requirements, especially noise nuisance. In paragraph 6C, Chairman, I noticed that the Director of Leisure and Cultural Services will be empowered to put up notices in parks with noise problems. I don't know why notices were only put up in parks with noise problems. Chairman, we follow the law, regardless of whether there is a noise problem or not. If you breach the provisions, you will be prosecuted. Of course, your objective is to prevent noise nuisance. Prevention is better than cure. You mustn't make arrests or give advice only after the problems emerge. So, in your view, how many parks are there with noise problems at the moment? Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for your questions. For leisure and cultural venues and parks, we do have notices put up stipulating what we can or cannot do. We have been criticized by members that sometimes the list gets too long. Now, there are parks being frequent subject of complaints, more prominent ones being Kowloon City and Tuen Mun. And we believe that on top of the existing notices in parks, we need to put up something else for better clarity, to make sure that park users will see the notices. So, about this provision in Section 25, in parks with a more rampant noise problem with greater nuisance, if we put up notices, it will help increase the effectiveness of our enforcement action. Now, Chairman, I'm not suggesting that there should be differential treatment for parks. They may have different situations, they may have different levels of background noise, and your subjective feeling may be different. But the crux of the matter is nuisance. Well, I think your colleagues need to think carefully. This word nuisance, whether it's a concern of anyone. And you need to consider whether you have sufficient manpower and whether you have the right person to make the right judgment. In terms of enforcement, often we receive complaints, and at the moment, our officers act on complaints. I don't suppose there will be a vast gray area when it comes to law enforcement. For example, at a venue, there may be a noise nuisance, and upon arrival of officers, the persons making such noise will rectify on receipt of advice. Well, I'm saying that you should not just act on complaints. You need to implement a system and train your staff to review the problem. Just because there isn't a complaint doesn't mean you can make excessive noise. All in all, I think you should make sure everyone is equal before the law. I think the point about the legislative amendment is to preserve flexibility for your staff. Say, if you put up a notice in Tuen Mun Park or another park forbidding the use of a loudspeaker, for example, this may not apply with to every park because of technological advancements. Would you like to explain further? My point is, say, if you may take law enforcement action in Park A in this manner and Park B in another manner. Yes, let me explain. In terms of enforcement, we need to provide sufficient training for our LCSD staff to deal with different issues. Now, after revising the regulation, we'll also step up training for LCSD staff to equip them fully with the knowledge on law enforcement, how these problems should be dealt with. Next, Mr. Ted Hui. Thank you, Chairman. I'm not happy with the proposed amendment to the pleasure grounds regulation. I'm not happy, not because of the actual amendment, but because of the long-standing problem of street performance. Say, for Central New Harbourfront, I receive lots of complaints about middle-aged women giving performances there. Only a small portion is managed by the LCSD, whilst the remaining stretches are managed by the Highways Department. And then you just look at the line and where it is drawn and say it's outside the management of the LCSD, and that's it. Over the years, you've only been willing to make minor improvements without a comprehensive review of the whole policy. At the District Council, You did a good job asking district officers to leave and having them lock themselves in a room, but you're not doing any improvement in this regard, except minor ones. Say for LCSD parks, under the revised regulation, as long as I step out of the park, I will not be caught by the regulation. Isn't it a loophole? And for street performance, I think the public's negative sentiment isn't towards tipping the performers. It's not just about noise control. The deeper conflict is how they behave themselves. It is so obscene that it's close to prostitution. So from the noise control perspective, of course, something should be done. But I wonder whether you can address the public's grievances simply by increasing the deterrence. What about young people who are street performers, who also receive tips and rewards to make ends meet? Is there still wiggle room for them? I think the government should think about it. You should not let the matter rest simply by amending this regulation. Secretary, I'd like to clarify with the member. Are you suggesting that you're not with us on this amendment? Or, well, I don't agree because I don't think the matter can be fully resolved by amending the regulation. As long as you step out of the venue, you can't control them. And also for the conflicts you see everywhere in Hong Kong is not always happening in your parks. In fact, Tuen Mun District Councillors, my fellow party members, also ask whether you can manage by way of allowing the hiring of venues or designating a zone. So can you tell me, after the amendment exercise, whether there will be a comprehensive review to formulate a policy for outdoor or street performances? Well, this involves a number of policy bureaus, such as Lands Department, etc. Well, I see the members' point. I know that members would make suggestions not only related to this piece of legislation, but all in all, this item is about amending the regulation itself. And regarding the problems facing these two parks, we could only rely on this piece of legislation. In fact, in my previous answers, I already mentioned that we have the Noise Control Ordinance, Cap 400, and Section 4 and 5 can be invoked to deal with other nuisance problems. I would urge the member to refer to other pieces of legislation in the laws to address other issues close to the heart of members. That's the narrow vision you have. You just turn blind whenever it's not within your portfolio. Next, Mr. Wu Chi-wai. I think the problem stemmed from Tuen Mun Park. There was a major incident, and also Hoi Sun Park, as mentioned by the other member. My understanding is that under the current regulation, the problem is somewhat fragmented, like the shopfront extension problem. It's clearly spelled out in the law. There are clear demarcations, whereas for details of enforcement, you can ask district councils to review them and see whether flexibility should be allowed, because the Home Affairs Bureau should empower the district councils, as we always say. Now, for this regulation, apart from the Home Affairs Bureau and the LCSD reviewing the enforcement matters from time to time, you should empower the district councils and involve them in your decision-making process. Because the circumstances and characteristics of different communities may be different. Second, I'm not happy with some of the terminology here. First, what is meant by a noise nuisance? And according to your paper, it is 10 decibels above the level of background noise. I don't know if I'm getting it correctly. I remember usually for the background noise in parks is 50 decibels, and if you say it's 10 decibels more than the background noise, that means a few people chattering in threes, in fours, and it's already a rather high level. I want to know whether this is the objective yardstick for your regulation. I understand there are 2 yardsticks. You need to consider the noise level and the nuisance created, because according to your wording, that those persons who play music or sing songs in parks for self-entertainment without accepting money reward and without cause nuisance to others, etc. How do you mean by causing nuisance to others? According to whom? How do you define nuisance? Finally, the most problematic part with any piece of legislation is interpretation, such as prohibition of group gathering, when you should prosecute. So I want to know whether the park management personnel will be the only law enforcement agency, such as LCSD. If on top of that, the Director of Leisure and Cultural Services can also delegate the power to other agencies, does it mean that the police can also enforce this regulation? Right, I think that's a question on yardstick, and also whether the district councils will be involved in. The district councils is our important collaborating partner. It is an important advisory structure. These are livelihood-related matters. We'll be happy to discuss with the district councils. Previously, we also exchanged views with district councils on various matters such as management of venues. And we do heed members' views in improving our enforcement work. Mr. Wu Chiwai just now mentioned law enforcement.
Even after law enforcement, we really have to provide evidence, like evidence in the environment, etc. So it's not for the LCSD staff to issue a fine and then it will take effect, because the case will be brought in front of the court and it will be judged by the court. So drawing reference from other regulations and also the court precedents, we find that the present yardstick is reasonable. Of course, we know that members are very concerned about the way that law enforcement is carried out. So we will step up with our training with our staff so that they can carry out more effective enforcement actions. Chairman, the enforcement officers, does it include the LCSD staff, or can the LCSD enforce or empower or delegate power to the police force to carry out enforcement actions? Yes, according to Section 32, basically it's about LCSD staff. It's on Section 32. It's about LCSD staff carrying out enforcement actions. Xiu Ka-fei. Thank you, Chairman. About the noise problem in parks and also the self-entertainment activities of the residents in park, it is difficult to strike a balance. For Hoi Sum Park in To Kwa Wan, I remember that about 17 years ago, I actually participated in some singing activities there. Of course, we did not receive any pecuniary reward. The park is quite spacious, so if people don't like our singing, they could move to other corner or other places. But nowadays, I think the singing activities or the performances have become very different, because sometimes it involves tipping. There might be some people who really enjoy those activities. However, because it's a public park, so it really does not project a good image of the venue. So I agree. If you want to give money to buy some enjoyment, I think you shouldn't go to the park to listen to the singing. And in West Kowloon, I know that you have some permits issuing to people who want to stage public performances there. So we need to strike a balance, and we should encourage people carrying out these activities, but on the other hand, they should not create noise nuisance and disturb other nearby citizens. Well, how do we strike a balance, and where do we draw the line? Of course, we need to put in more thoughts to it. But for those activities, if we have the regulation in place, and if tipping or pecuniary reward is not allowed anymore, then I hope that the problem can die out naturally. But if you said that the entire park, we would not allow people to bring in musical instruments into parks, I don't think it's reasonable. Sometimes there are people, for instance, doing exercises in the morning. There might be ladies or middle-aged women who bring some music. But those music are not very loud. They need to have the music in order to dance to it. Sometimes even the Tai Chi, people exercising Tai Chi or some dance, they need some music, or background music. But those music not of very high level. So I don't think you should have a regulation saying that people should not play music in the park at all. It's just that we have to control their noise level and give out some reasonable standard. For instance, 2 or 3 years ago in Mongkok, in the pedestrian walkway, and there were people who staged performances there and played a very high volume of music. So people around in the area were very unhappy about it. So I think we have to strike a balance. And people's level of acceptance may be different in different districts. So, well, I believe that we should consult the local residents in the district. Well, some people may even say that they are not happy if the noise level is too low. Well, anyway, I support this proposed amendment. Okay, it's a matter of striking a balance and drawing the line. Yes, thank you, members. We will your views. We will take note of your views. We hope that after the legislation has been amended, then all residents could enjoy the park, and there could be different activities in the parks. Holden Chow, thank you, Chairman. Well, people mentioned about Tuen Mun Park. There were noise problems and noise nuisance in Tuen Mun Park, and nearby residents were very unhappy about it. And that's the reason why we have the proposed legislative amendments in front of us today. And for the arrangement, I have some follow-up questions. Now that you are expanding the definition or changing the term users thereof into person, that is, any other user thereof into any other person. Of course, this is a good move. And any other person, including the LCSC staff and nearby residents, can act as a prosecution witness. I think this is good because this will enable more effective enforcement actions. However, there might be a problem arising from it. Well, in the past, we saw that there were some LCSD parks that suffer not just from noise nuisance, but other problems as well. And the LCSD staff sometimes in handling the matter might not be too confident to do so because they didn't know whether this is within their ambit to do it. Some might think that it would be better for the police to carry out enforcement actions. Well, if this is there is a gray area, and if people are not sure about who should have the right to carry out enforcement actions, then it will actually delay the problem from being solved. So I'd like to ask the Secretary, well, just now you have made it very clear that Section 32 empower LCSD staff to carry out enforcement actions. But I'd like to listen whether you have, I'd like to know whether you have some mechanisms in place so that the staff really understand this thoroughly. We don't want to see the situation that the LCSD staff themselves do not know that it's within their power to carry out enforcement actions. Because after all these process, legislative amendments, etc., if the frontline staff do not know that it is within their power to carry out the enforcement actions, then any kind of legislation would be just to no avail. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Member, for your views. For LCSD, I have been in contact with their staff, and I know that they are very professional people. And in different government venues, they actually have received very good training, and they are very experienced and professional people. Of course, there are some unexpected incidents from happening, and we need to give support and also relevant training to our frontline staff. Especially if the legislation has been amended, then we need to step up with our training so as to inform them properly about the updated legislation. We would also provide ample support to our colleagues in LCSD. Well, if something is beyond their control or it is beyond their power to handle, then we would need to seek other support from other departments. Well, for instance, if there are emergency situations or if there are cases that they can't handle, then we might need to carry out joint action with other government departments or bureaus. So, but then members could rest assured that the LCSD staff are very professional and they have received very good training. Right, it's my turn to raise question. I understand that you have incorporated the views collected during the previous consultation and come up with further amendment to the legislation. And this is good. Some loopholes can be filled. And some members asked about tipping activities, if the pecuniary reward are in the form of electronic form or delayed reward. That is, if the tipping does not occur on the spot. For instance, it could be online or it could be delayed kind of tipping. Do you have the power to go after them and carry out enforcement action? And also about repeated offenders. Will you have a blacklist? Is there a blacklisting system to keep the information of the repeated offenders? In the present proposed amendment, it states that we need to collect evidence before a case or offense could be formed or grounded. We need to collect evidence and then we will bring it in front of the court for the judge to make a ruling. So I believe that the different kind of situations that you mentioned just now could be covered. As for the whether we have a blacklist, well, under the pleasure grounds regulation, when we look at section 32 of the regulation, it empowers the LCSD staff to carry out enforcement actions, including to evict the offenders out of the venue. Thank you, Chairman. What that means, if a person is a repeated offender, then the LCSD staff will have the right to bar him from entering the venue. Well, it depends on what kind of offense he has committed. Yes, under Section 32, the LCSD staff will have the right to do so. Okay, so members generally are in support of the proposed legislative amendments. Some members raise different views about the different standards or how the balance could be struck. But what is the timetable? We are now speaking with the DOJ and working on the final version. And within May, we hope that we could table the proposed amendments, and we will do it in the form of negative vetting. And we hope that the amended legislation could take effect before the end of this legislative session. Thank you very much. So if members do not have further questions, we will move on to the next item on the agenda. That is progress of review of the building management ordinance and related administrative measures. Let's invite the administration to enter the meeting room. We will have Mr. Jack Chan, Undersecretary for Home Affairs, and his team to brief us on the paper. In addition to Mr. Jack Chan, we'll also have Ms. Vega Wong, Deputy Director of Home Affairs Department, and also Mr. Alfred Lee, Assistant Director of Home Affairs from the HAD. Mr. Jack Chan, Undersecretary, please walk us through the paper. Thank you, Chairman. And thank you, members. The paper is about the progress of the review of the Building Management Ordinance, BMO, Cap 344, and related administrative measures. We have reported to members about our work. We have 60 proposed amendments on 9 areas, together with a series of administrative measures proposed. We have taken into consideration the views of the various stakeholders, including members of the public, representative of the OC, Owners Corporation, and also the Management Committee and property management companies, etc. Well, this will have effect in the management of the housing, so we believe that there should be education for the public members so that people would know about the legislation.
So that these OCs will be equipped to deal with the legislative amendments. And we also have administrative guidelines, including issuing the new codes of practice and also guidelines and a checklist of procedural propriety on building management. Through publicity and public education campaigns, we encourage owners corporations, owners committees to adopt the administrative guidelines and the checklist so as to build a good foundation. Depending on the needs of owners and OCs, we've launched a series of support measures. For example, in May last year, we launched a pilot scheme on advisory services to OCs. We engaged in PMC to provide professional advisory advice to eligible OCs, and we advise them on daily operation, on procedural matters, building management problems, etc. The scheme has recently been regularized in March. We also help owners in resolving disputes to enhance the level of building management. In September last year, we collaborated with the Law Society of Hong Kong, and we have introduced a free outreach legal advice service on building management to provide free legal advisory support service to OCs. We will continue to gauge the effectiveness of these measures to provide more appropriate support and timely support to these owners and OCs. In terms of legislative amendment proposals, we will continue to work closely with the Department of Justice and other relevant departments. And in terms of the administrative measures, We will draw on the reference and the views of OCs to finalize the legislative amendment proposals. Thank you. We welcome questions from members. Each will be given 4 minutes. Let me read out the names. Alvin Yang, Xiuka Chen, Michael Tin. We start with Mr. Alvin Yang. Thank you, Chairman. We have waited long enough for the amendment to Cap 344. It covers a very wide scope, but I'd like to focus on paragraph 44, section 31. The proposal is that the OC can be dissolved or changed if the request is not more than 10% of the owners. I want to know whether after amending this provision, some real problems can be addressed. Say, in my constituency, resolution was passed at the request of 5% of owners to dissolve the MC, but years passed and the MC was still not dissolved. So, after revising the legislation, can we solve this kind of problems? For example, we have the MCs and office holders not willing to give up their positions, or the non-performing MCs not willing to call for meetings. Can we tackle these problems? Indeed, some OCs have not been fulfilling their building management responsibilities. The problem must be dealt with regardless of the reason. The objective of the legislative amendment exercise is for us to exercise the power to dissolve the still non-performing MC so that an administrator can be appointed to look after the operation. This will help OCs fulfill their responsibilities again. We have previous scenarios in which the chair of the OC went missing, and as such, the committee could not operate. Under the proposed amendment, in the case of the chairmanship being vacant, deputy chair can stand in, or the secretary, or someone else appointed by the OC can fill the vacancy. I have a further question, Chairman. According to the administration's response, in Annex D and Annex B, I'm referring to page 6, the government's response. The government is of the view that by raising the threshold of not more than 10%, upon warning if there is no improvement, an administrator can be appointed. Now, I want to know what the word warning means. Does it come in the form of writing? For example, if you do not take action within, say, 28 days, you will appoint an administrator. And about the administrator, is it like what the administration said? You follow the precedence or the hierarchy of the MC, or that the MC members could elect one member of their own. We consider different circumstances, and we must allow another chance. So the first step is to issue a warning. We haven't finalized what form the warning should take. We keep all options open, and we welcome views as to how the warning is to be issued. And also for the authority to appoint an administrator, we take into account different matters. For example, professionals may be appointed from, say, a property management company or from a legal profession to be administrator. We do not have many members here. Chairman, do you say I should wait for another round, or I should just have another minute. Yes, please go ahead. Again, on page 7 of the English version, in the box, the government's response, it says, unless there are exceptional grounds, the authority will only exercise the power in respect of any OC once every 12 months. Exceptional grounds? Can I have more details? During public consultation, we heard concerns expressed by OCs owners and also PMCs whether the authority will repeatedly exercise its power. For example, they may scrap an MC and appoint another, and this will create confusion for the OCs. That is why we stipulate that the power will only be exercised once every 12 months. But there are exceptional grounds. For example, after appointing an OC, there may be the case of an emergency, albeit the MC may be incompetent. Say there may be urgent building repair because of a flood and other maintenance problems, and in such exceptional circumstances, we can appoint another MC. Mr. Zhuge Chen, we know what a proxy instrument means, or proxy vote means. But proxy itself can create a loophole. After the anti-extradition bill movement last year, riot police repeatedly entered a private housing estate in Tinshui and fired tear gas. Now, owners were very dissatisfied with the PMC's performance, the OC's performance. They convened an AGM in December last year asking for the MC to be replaced, but 80% of the votes were proxy votes. In the end, the membership did not change. This year, another repeat of the incident happened in Siusai 1. In the residents' meeting, one person had some 29,000 proxy votes. The existing legislation does not allow the checking of votes. According to the paper, in relation to proxy instruments and also the verification mechanism, and I'm referring to point 52 of your legislative amendment, do you mean that you will scrap the proxy mechanism and require all owners to vote in person? And about the mechanism, does it mean that they will be allowed to check the votes and to make sure that there will be one person, one vote? And in February, in another OC meeting, some owners were barred from taking part in the AGM, and some reporters were also barred from carrying out their reporting duties at the venue. So, if the person is an occupier, a tenant instead of an owner, will he be rejected? And will the OC be empowered to reject the entry of reporters to carry out reporting duties? I'll try my best to answer the series of questions. First, I will take the former question and I'll defer to the department to take the latter ones. As far as building maintenance is concerned, involvement of the owners is of crucial importance. We also try to strike a balance. If owners cannot attend the meeting, if the owner is otherwise engaged, then he can delegate his children or his spouse on his behalf. The main point is we need a balance. We need the owner to fulfill their responsibilities as well. But this also creates a long-standing problem. We have been hearing criticisms of bogus proxy instruments, so it is important to refine this mechanism. And in our administrative guidelines and legislative amendments, we have specifically targeted proxy instruments. Say for large-scale maintenance projects, the part of the proxy instruments will be decreased. The threshold will increase from 10% to 20%, and for large-scale maintenance projects, the owners should appear in person. And in order to stem out the problem, we only allow one person to have not more than 5% of the proxy instruments. At the moment, there is no restriction, and this will greatly reduce the chance of abuse. We also have a series of administrative measures. For example, original of proxy instruments should be used, not photocopies. It should come with a serialized numbers. And those entering the venue should sign and make a declaration stating that the proxy instrument is obtained in an honest and truthful manner. Can I invite the administration to answer my other question regarding verification of votes and the question about reporters? If the owner is unable to attend and have delegated a proxy to attend, the Secretary already mentioned the verification mechanism. For the proxy instruments, at the moment, the name of the proxy should be stated, and as I understand, as an administrative requirement, the housing estates will require the person attending the meeting to provide proof of identity. On the question of whether tenants can attend, according to the legislation or according to the ordinance, during an AGM, notice on the date and time of the AGM should be served not only to the owner but also to the tenant or occupier. If the tenant is so authorized under Section 15 of the BMO, he is entitled to attend the meeting. For reporters who are not a tenant or occupier or owner, according to Provision 7 of Schedule 3, the procedures of the AGM are to be decided by the OCs. So this should be left to the OCs.
Next, Mr. Michael Tin. Paragraph 13 and 14 on the paper, I have two questions. On paragraph 14, it talks about how disputes can be settled, and I believe that the dispute resolution services will be useful. I wonder why there have only been 45 cases so far. I know that even in Chunwan, the number would be even bigger than that. Is it because the publicity has not been big enough, or because of its capacity is very limited only? Maybe a lot of people want to have this service, however, because of limited capacity, they have not been able to do so. And also for management of building, very often it boils down to whether you can find committed people to join the OC and participate in the management. If you can't, then there's no use having just the OC on its own. But actually, a lot of people may not be well versed in the legislation or in the management of building, and will be very difficult for them to handle cases that involves a very large large amount of money. And a few years ago, people suggested forming special committee, inviting professional people from the legal field, accountant field, etc., to provide professional advice. But the most important thing is that this kind of service must be integrated, and should not go to different professional bodies to seek advice. The best thing is to form a team of professional people to hold a meeting for 3 to 4 hours and provide professional advice to them on various areas. For instance, tendering process, vetting of the votes. Because I have a lot of people seeking help from me, and I was not able to provide them with the relevant professional people. I know that a lot of OCs really want the government to provide these professional service to them because they don't trust other groups and other bodies. They want the government to provide this kind of service to them because the government will be more independent, or the team formed by the government would be independent. Yes, thank you, Mr. Tin. We agree. For dispute resolution, the service is very well sought after. And now we have received 45 applications and resolved 21 disputes. This looks like a small number, but actually, when we look deeply, we know that, well, we provide different kinds of professional service to the stakeholders. For instance, we have pre-meeting, advisory meeting, that is to prepare the OC before the AGM. And we, especially for the newly established OCs or MCs, management committees. So we provide training, or we have provided over 16,000 cases of this kind of pre-meeting briefings. We also provide free legal advice service on building management to the OCs. Well, okay, that means there's no long queue, right? There are only 45 applications. So it doesn't mean that there are people who want your service but fail to receive it, right? Okay, that's good. Okay. It's not like waiting to be housed in the public housing estates, right? So there's no queue. Okay. And we help the OCs. It's not just this work is not just done by the HAD. Actually, we have other government departments. For instance, buildings department. We have different panel platforms created to help the owners. For instance, to check the newly built building. No, I know, but the problem is that the people don't know where to go. I think you should provide a kind of one-stop service to them. You shouldn't ask them to go to different government departments to seek service. Well, there is this Urban Renewal Resource Center. And then for fire services, you go to the fire service department. For maintenance, then you go to electronic and mechanical engineering department. Of course, if there is a one-stop center, that will be good. But then we have a platform. How about the HAD? Can you actually take the lead and create this kind of one-stop service to provide to the OC members? Yes, you mean you can provide this kind of one-stop service to them? We do have a platform in place. No, I'm not talking about just a platform because it is not very evident. People don't know where to go, and they have to keep dialing different numbers and then go to different government departments, and they find it a nuisance. And they really find it very helpless, and they just have to go like shopping for different services. So the best thing is that to form a team of professional people, and then you just go there to have a meeting with them for 3 to 4 hours and provide all the professional services they need in one go. Yes, we do have this kind of activities. There is a kind of like town hall meeting, or sort of like a seminar or a meeting. No, I'm not talking about seminar. If there is a case, for instance, they want the government to provide service, it's just like a case study. It shouldn't be a seminar or a lecture. It's a case study. They do have a case at hand. They want to seek professional advice from government. For instance, they're tendering documents. They want to receive professional advice on how to handle it. And yes, we do. We are providing this kind of services. Well, let me spend some time to supplement, Chairman. Well, just now the Undersecretary talked about the talks. Actually, it is case-related. talks. It's not just seminars. In 2018 September, we have a central platform on buildings management, and those who have received the fire services department or the buildings department notice to ask them to check the newly built premises. Well, after receiving these notices, we understand that the owners or the OCs do not know what to do. So we will then, according to different district, on district basis, we will have a kind of central platform. It is kind of one-stop service. We have representatives from the fire services department, electronic, mechanical department, urban Home Affairs Department, etc. All representatives from these departments will attend. So if the owners or the OC members have any question related to these departments, they could raise their questions on the spot. And even after the meeting, there are contact that will be left to them. Well, how long? Well, is it 3 hours, half an hour meeting? How long will it last? Usually, it's will be held. They are held in the evening or during weekends. Usually, it's about 2 hours or more than 2 hours meeting. And the representatives, because they already after the meeting, they will have the contact numbers. So the owners or the tenants, if they have further questions, they know who to call. They will have the contact numbers, and they don't need to call the hotlines anymore. As for more detailed cases, we do have a advisory or consultancy group for buildings management. For instance, if the owners receive a notice from the government department, we will have a panel formed for them. There will be lawyers, accountants, surveyors, and also building management professionals who would answer their questions. And after receiving application, the HAD will do the matching and then invite this kind of advisory group to answer their questions. Is it face-to-face meeting? It's face-to-face. That's good. So I hope that with this supplement, or perhaps we will step up with our further publicity. I just like member to know that we are already providing this kind of services. Yes, I think you should step up with the publicity so that owners will know about these services available. Dr. Fernando Zhang. Thank you, Chairman. In addition to the CAP 344, the proposed amendment to it, well, another part is, as the Undersecretary mentioned, the government hopes the owners will participate in the management of the building. But then actually it is not easy to form the OC. There are some housing estates that find it difficult to form the OC. For instance, if the deeds of mutual covenant covers a lot of area, for instance, clubhouse, shopping malls, etc., then eventually the tenants and also added together, then the proportion may not be very high. So there is a threshold if you want to form an OC. Very often, all the owners together do not form 100% of the OCs. So like one pole and also in different kind of housing estates. I live in the place where I live is not a small housing estate. However, we have not been able to form an OC. And in Lohas Park as well, I know that many of the buildings could not form their own OCs. So this is not a small problem. As you mentioned, you want to encourage owners to participate in the management of their building. But then because of the restriction of CAP 344, many of the owners have not been able to form the OC for their buildings. Can we perhaps lower the threshold? For instance, 10% of the owners, for instance, through a kind of statutory process. But those are only exceptional cases. It's not general cases. Have you ever considered lowering the ratio of the ownership, or lowering the threshold for the owners to form their own OCs? Thank you, Dr. Chang. This is a very important point, we also have discovered that there are a lot of quite some housing estates that have spent a long time before they could establish their own OC. Now it's 30% of the owners. That is a threshold. But for major housing estates, it's not easy for them to obtain 30%. And the opposition group may be able to obtain 30% of owners from their part as well. So some people mentioned about lowering the threshold to 10%, perhaps through statutory process or with the approval of the administration, then they could be allowed to form OCs. But then these are exceptional cases only. The reason behind is that we really hope to have more owners participating in the management of their own buildings. And it is on genuine needs and with real motivation that they would come out to participate in the work and form an OC. Well, for us, the HA department, we have professional group helping owners to form OCs. And but then we agree we have come across with difficult cases as well. Many years have been spent without without being able to form an OC. After 1985, all the deeds of mutual covenant have to be approved by the Lands Department before they could take effect. This is to prevent the forming of sort of so-called unequal treaties. Before 1985, there was such undesirable situation. That is, there might be some major owners who, in their hands, have a lot of units, and then they did not live there. They didn't even pay the management fee. Well, there were such cases in the past. But then members can rest assured that after 1985, all the deeds are properly made. A lot of major developers, including the MTRC, you'll find that for the housing estates developed by them, it's difficult for owners to form OCs, even without the so-called unequal treaty. But then because the developers is so powerful, they are very influential, and so they could continue to possess or even monopolize the management of the estates. Well, of course, all these are operated on a commercial basis, and it is different from what the HAD has been advocating. That is to encourage owners to participate in the management of their own building. So this is in contradiction to what the HAD is hoping for. So as a policy, I believe that perhaps you should consider amending the legislations or the relevant regulations, or have some administrative measures in place so as to enable these housing estates to be able to form their own OCs.
And the Secretary. Well, Dr. Zhang is correct in describing our policy direction. We'd like to encourage owners to form OCs. Technically, however, it is not an easy task. In fact, we received views from the community. Some owners would rather that the estate be managed by the DMC manager. They may have faith in the PMC in setting up instead of setting up an OC. The most important thing is for them to have a voice and to be able to vote. Mr. Ma Hongkwok. Thank you, Chairman. I have two questions. First, according to the administration's paper, the administration encourages computerization of OC records. I'm in strong support of that for better transparency. It will be easier to dig out records. But I'd like to know details from the administration, what it has done to promote computerization. Will there be a standard template for data entry so that you can have standardized data entry, and whether training can be provided and what assistance can be given to these OCs? The other question is this. Last year, you introduced a FOLAS that is in collaboration with the Law Society. Free outreach legal advice service on building management was introduced last year. Up to 6 hours of meeting. I want to know how many people utilize the service and whether any feedback has been received. Thank you, Mr. Ma, for your question, and I thank Mr. Ma for supporting our proposal to computerize OC records. This is a major exercise. We have over 40,000 buildings in Hong Kong. Computerizing the OC records and information indeed is a large-scale project. We will do our best. As I understand, the first step is to work on the paper-based records. That is to digitize the paper-based old systems. In other words, we need to standardize the format. I think this will be a worthy exercise, and it must be done. We will, of course, seek experts' help in finding the quickest way to digitize data and standardize a template for easy entry. About the free legal advice, the outreach scheme, we have been collaborating with the Law Society of Hong Kong. We provide on-spot outreach legal advice service. Each OC is eligible for 6 hours of free legal advice. OCs will be assisted in the form of reading papers, and the representatives will also attend OC meetings and give legal advice on the spot. The service was introduced in September last year. So far, we've only received a dozen applications because this service is still rather new. We will step up our publicity effort. We hope more OCs will use the service. Have you gauged a preliminary response? Users find it useful. It's positive. But this scheme comes with certain conditions. For example, for the rental value, it must not exceed a certain amount because our target is to help grassroots buildings, owners of whom may not be able to afford legal advice. And in the same year, there should not be other forms of services available. And also, if there is no lawyer present in an OC, assistance will be offered. Otherwise, there will be a clash of legal advice and there will be chaos. As I mentioned, so far we have received some applications, and we will step up our publicity effort to encourage more OCs to use our service. Mr. Jun is hold next. Thank you, Chairman. About CAP 344, BMO's revamp and the progress of review, I am 100% behind it. I also see this proposal to encourage voluntary compliance. I want to share this experience with you. I don't think voluntary works. If you want to make improvements in building management, if you want to make things more transparent and enhance the compliance, if you want to make sure these are done, you need to make it mandatory. And specifically, I am referring to instruments, meeting papers, tender documents. I think these records should be kept properly. The IT Bureau should provide more innovative means for us. E-filing is important. Nowadays, even 5G is ready. We're all equipped with mobile phones. We have really advanced scanners. Owners Corporation comes under the HAB's portfolio. It has a registration certificate. Whenever we have meetings, you have representatives. And now they're offered 6 hours of free legal advice under the outreach scheme. I see more and more commitment. But your work hasn't been effective. Say for an aged housing estate, major building maintenance and repair may be needed. At the same time, the cookie jar is almost full, and some with hidden agenda may therefore try to dip their hands into the jar. And we therefore hear about a lot of problems at meetings. Say for the tendering for the project tendering, etc. It seems that you have been allowing these people to have their way. Your monitoring work is not effective enough. You need to be more proactive. You need to help these owners because not all are legal professionals. That's the starting point. You need to follow the established procedures. The minutes of the meeting should be sent to the central registry so that the Home Affairs Department can then monitor the situation. When you delegate the task to a certain lawyer, all the papers will be ready. You don't need to spend 80% of effort in extra to fight for the retrieval of records. You don't even need to ask whether the papers are ready if you make it mandatory. Say, according to the law, after 14 days after the meeting is held, or before the next meeting is held, you need to put up the minutes at a conspicuous place for inspection. Then everything will be ready and under the sun. It will be easy to check the records. You need to interfere actively, providing guidance to minimize conflict and disputes. For management account, financial account, bidding matters, tendering, e-filing should be made mandatory so that we don't need to fight for records to be available. Next point is about proxy. E-filing shouldn't just go to the management company or the management office. Because as the representatives of the Home Affairs Department, I will also attend the meeting. You need to make sure ensure the submission of documents. The government should be more committed. With the help of professional lawyers, you will be much more efficient and you'll be able to avoid disputes. And then on the part of dispute resolution at a later stage, it will greatly facilitate the work of the mediator or the tribunal officer. So I think prevention is better than cure when it comes to dispute resolution. If you set the stage properly, you will be able to avoid disputes. So these are my few comments. Under Secretary. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Ho, for supporting us, and I fully agree with you. We need to minimize dispute, and this is very important. On building management, we agree that preventive measures should be taken. Buildings should be managed properly before something goes wrong, and that is why we have a series of measures to help owners and owners corporations equip themselves with the necessary knowledge and skills to fulfill their building management responsibilities. In Annex A, we set out our recommendations, including proxy instruments and the tendering process. We understand the need to impose mandatory requirements, and this will be the case once the legislation is passed. At the moment, the amendment hasn't passed yet, and we therefore must adhere to voluntary compliance. On a voluntary basis, they will need to observe the code of practice, etc. And meanwhile, they can also build solid foundation and acquire experience. Once the law is passed, they won't be caught off guard because of the experience gained, and that's our objective. About the series of measures such as free legal advice, dispute resolution, all these are preventive measures to do the preparation right to avoid other problems. You have other questions? Can I ask all the questions, Chairman, if time permits? Of course. Do you have a timetable when you consider making these voluntary measures mandatory? Legislative timetable. The Council will be paroled in 2 or 3 months, and we won't have time. But after the new term of electrical begins, we will spare no time in proceeding with this exercise. We have done ample consultation. At the moment, the proposal is not controversial. So in the next legislative year, we hope to implement these as soon as possible. Lastly, my turn. The questions have been asked by members already. There is an urgent need to amend BMO Cap 344. This should be enforced as quickly as possible, because we'll see more and more bickering over building management matters. There are controversial issues such as proxy votes, keeping of records, transparency, law enforcement. I think these measures will help resolve disputes. I understand the tight time frame. Maybe we need to wait until the next legislative year. I understand in January you've decided to implement best practices and administrative guidelines modeling on this proposal. You're encouraging OCs and PMCs to follow the best practices on building management. I want to know whether you have any statistics. Have you received any complaints or requests for assistance if PMCs did not comply with your best practices?
Thank you, Chairman. First, about the policy measures. Before making it mandatory, we have guidelines of operation and also best practices. It is not mandatory. However, those who do not comply, well, if disputes arise and if there are litigation, then for those who have not complied with the COP, the Code of Practice, then this will constitute an evidence. That is, the OC has not been doing well or performing its tasks properly. Well, of course, the best thing is to turn it into a mandatory requirement. Deputy Director, any supplement? From the beginning of last year onward, we have put forward the best practice and also the code of practice and also a checklist. Through different channels, we have promoted these to the various OCs and encouraged them to accept the practice. Now, up to now, there are over 160 OCs who have indicated that they will comply with those requirements on a voluntary basis. As mentioned, we have a free legal advice service on building management, and it will be regularized. So it is exactly because we hope that the OCs will accept all these best practices and new arrangement. And that's why we provide this advice or free legal advice, so as to so-called give an extra pair of hands to the OCs, so as to allow them to comply with the best practice requirements. Because at present this is still a voluntary basis, there is no penalty for non-compliance. However, for the code of practice, if litigation arises, then the court will draw reference from the COP to see whether the OC has perform its task according to the COP. Well, the reason why we do not think we should impose penalty on non-compliance, at least at this stage, because we find that for voluntary administrative measures, then we could encourage the OCs to participate in the work, and so that they will be given a chance to gather experience. And then through these experience, we could then see whether we would need to further refine the regulations. And so for the time being, we will continue to keep it on a voluntary basis and see how the response will be. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I understand. Well, just now you mentioned that over 160 OCs have indicated their willingness to comply. But then throughout Hong Kong, this number of 160 is really just the minority. I hope that you could step up with your publicity work and also encourage more OCs to participate. Dr. Genius Ho? I don't know whether this question has been asked before I arrived. For those 3 nose buildings, I think we have touched upon this problem in our previous review, and also proxies in the large-scale maintenance projects, the problems there, etc. How are you going to handle the 3 nose building? Because they do not have OCs, they do not have management committee, and they do not have management or property management companies. They are 3 nose building. So there is no legal ground for anyone to govern the management of these buildings. So we can only rely on the commitment of the people or the owners. Well, that is hard to judge, and it is too precarious. How many 3 nose buildings are there in Hong Kong right now? And also, for the review, do you have any plans of reviewing how these problems could be tackled? That is the problem with the 3 nose buildings. If the owners do not agree to form an OC, are we going to have a kind of standard building management regulations? Do you have any thoughts about it? Undersecretary? Thank you, Dr. Ho. For the 3 nose building, yes, it is really a big problem in building management. 3 nose, that means they do not have owners corporations, no management committee, and no property management companies. And in Hong Kong, we have over 26,000 that have property management companies, and about 9,000 that are managed by the OCs. And then there are also about 90 odd buildings that are 3 nose building. And that really poses a big problem. We are stepping up efforts to try to tackle the issue. We've formed a building management consultancy service. That is, we hire professional property management companies that will help the 3 nose building to form OCs. Well, this is a difficult task. We have been talking with the property management companies, and they admitted that this is really a very challenging task. They have to spend a lot of time. They have to talk to the owners and the tenants, try to get to know them, and then try to introduce them about the advantages of forming OCs, about the importance of proper management of their own buildings. So this is really very time-consuming and labor-intensive work. But then, even so, they have been successful because about 580 OCs have been formed. among these three-nose building. So this is not a small feat. So they have been working very hard, and the result is encouraging. They will continue to with their effort, and they will continue to talk with the owners and tenants of the three-nose building. Well, for another. On the other hand, there are owners of the three-nose building. Some of them may not be living in the buildings. So the owners may not really understand the problem of the building. The building could be some dilapidated premises. Some of the owners may not even want to know or may not want to face the problems. So we try to recruit some residents, sort of so-called resident ambassador in those buildings. There are about 4,000 of them. And for these tenants ambassador, they would liaise with our staff in the 18 district or home affairs offices. And for instance, if there are any problems in the building, for instance, the stairs have been blocked, they will report to our staff. And this is kind of people-intensive work. So through the liaison with the tenants ambassadors, we will then know the problem of the management. And these ambassadors may even know the owners. Sometimes they could be the owners themselves. So through these contacts, we will then slowly convince them the importance and the advantages of forming OCs, and hope to become successful, to convince them to form the OCs. And we also put in special resources to help the three-nose building to conduct cleansing work. For instance, during the epidemic period, through some pilot schemes in the districts, we have conducted the cleansing work among over 1,000 times over 800 three-nose building. Well, this is our long-term goal. We will continue to provide service to these three-nose building. So if there are no further questions, the meeting will be adjourned, and we now come to the last point item. Any other business? No other business. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.